Tri-Cities Community TV presents coverage of the Truth and Reconciliation Day activities held at Nunes Creek and put on by the Port Moody Ecological Society.
Oh, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, good, excellent, good afternoon. I'm just going to start by introducing myself in an Indigenous language, and I know I have to turn all the way around here because we're surrounded by people. So I just want to say Bojo, Makwawan is Koidishnikas Megazay Dodum, and that means greetings. My spirit name is Bear Paw Woman, and my clan is Eagle. And before I acknowledge the ceremony, the territories, which I'm going to do in a really good, heartfelt, authentic way. I just wanted to connect us to our spirits while we're here to listen to these words and sometimes hard, awkward conversations to have about this topic of truth and reconciliation. So I'm just going to play the drum. I don't carry songs. I use the drum a lot. I work in school systems in Surrey School District, and I work in Coquitlam School District, so a total of 16 years as a Indigenous child and youth care worker, and I use the drum a lot in my work. And so I just want you to invite you to put your hand on your heart, and I'm just going to do about a minute of heartbeat sounds, and to connect your heart and mind so that we're here together with one mind, one heart to hear these teachings. We'll do that again when I end, to take a moment of silence for all of the lost lives that we're going to honor today. So I wrote this speech this morning, typing to the last minute before I got in the car to come over here. So it comes really directly from my heart and my lived experience as an Indigenous woman on these Coast Salish territories. I was told I could talk as long as I wanted and take space. I'll read some, and some I'll speak from my heart. Some is researched information, and some is my words as an educator. So, as I said, my name is Bear Paw Woman, and I belong to the Eagle Clan. I was gifted that name 29 years ago in the city of Take Toronto, also known as Toronto, which is a Mohawk word meaning tree standing in the water. I was living on that territory for 3 years, so these are my base teachings, Anishinaabe. I raise my hands to the Anishinaabe people for sharing their ways with me while I was living on their territory. I'm Cree-Mohawk and Métis. I've been living here on Coast Salish territory for 25 years, living, working, and raising my 2 bear cubs, my adult sons who are 21 and 19, right here in this community of Port Moody. However, I have been living in Port Coquitlam for the past 7 years in the core territory of the Coquitlam peoples. I'd like to formally acknowledge that we are standing on and learning together in a good way on the shared territories of the Coquitlam, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, Squamish, Katzie, Kwantlen, Kakite, and Stalo peoples. What do all these names mean? And why do we acknowledge territories? I'm going to tell you about that in a little bit. I am a message amplifier, an educator, a facilitator, and a truth teller. I am a mother, a sister, an auntie, a Surrey School District youth worker, a former union leader, a current MBA student studying Indigenous business leadership, And of course, I am a bear with eagle vision. I come from Treaty 6 territory near Amitywaskagan, also known as Beaver Hills House or Edmonton. I have paternal connections to the Michelle Band, mainly from the family name Calahoo, and Victoria and Red River settlements is where my Métis heritage comes from the family name Whitford. I am telling you this because there are many pretend Indians out there these days, falsely claiming indigeneity, reaping benefits meant to uplift our people out of systemic racism and genocidal practices. People reclaiming indigeneity is a complex issue requiring attention from HR departments, scholarship organizations, educational institutions, and anywhere else meant for reconciliatory practices. It's going to be one of those awkward, difficult, possibly triggering conversations that we're in right now. And I welcome any tears that you choose to share. Tears are a signal of healing and releasing, to make space for something new. And I will leave you with hope and ask for a commitment to action. I'm going to talk about 3 things today: territorial acknowledgements, the history of TRC Day, where we are now and where we must go, and your personal commitment to reconciliation and taking it forward, organizationally, politically, with workplace conversations and hopefully actions. We can't do this together. We need allies. So territorial acknowledgements. Why do we do them? It's an age-old practice between First Nations to acknowledge that you are coming to their territory in a good way to trade, bring news, bring invitations, create alliances, or visit loved ones, since there was a lot of cross-community marriages. Host nations would need to know who was on their territory, because if anything happened, such as war or natural disaster, they would need to know you were there and that they would protect you. Nowadays, we do it as an act of truth, because Canada did a good job of hiding whose land and territory this is, and how it became what we now call Canada, 156 years old. But colonization happened or began long before that, and systems of Indigenous racism came along with it. The pillars of our society, the education system, the healthcare system, the justice system, the child welfare system, and the capitalist system are riddled with systemic racism. It's a harsh truth, but that is how our country began. Indigenous people, Black people, disabled people, gay, trans, or other non-binary people, women, none of them were at the table when all of the systems were being created and implemented in what we now call Canada. So we need to dismantle the systems to be more inclusive, more diverse, more equitable, and fair. We need to move beyond performative actions and continue to learn. But we need actions that create change, because the efforts of residential schools bring intergenerational suffering. And that's why we see our women and our men going missing and being found murdered, or not found in Winnipeg landfills, not searched for. And why we see that Indigenous children have the lowest graduation rates, the highest suicide rates, and the highest number of children in care, sometimes called pipeline to prison, because we also occupy those statistics of highest prison rates and the justice system involvement. These systems, designed to organize Canadian society, are still currently harming our people, our children, and our women. If the women and children are murdered, missing, suiciding, overdosing on opioids, then indeed the effects of genocide are still happening on those territories that I just acknowledged. So let's begin with learning something about this land together. Queequitlam, can you say that? Queequitlam. It means the red fish up the river. The red fish up the river, so they would put their cedar nets, they would create their cedar nets out of the cedar tree, the tree of life, from the inner bark of cedar. They would make their nets, and they would put them at the narrow bottleneck part of the river where they could catch the most salmon to sustain their families and villages. That's what Queequitlam means. Kaitsi, can you say Kaitsi?
Kaitsi.
Kaitsi means the springy moss that covers this territory. So as you're walking on the forested lands, and you're walking and you step on moss and it springs back, that's resilience. And that's what our people are. We're resilient people. So that's what Katesy means, that springing action of that springy kind of green, bright green moss that we see on these territories. That's what Katesy means. Can you say Tsleil-Waututh? Tsleil-Waututh means the people of the inlet. They used to be called the Burrard Band. I don't know who Burrard was. I haven't researched that, but I'm sure it was some kind of white settler dude. So the Tsleil-Waututh people, they would say when the tide went out, then the table was set. So they're the people of the inlet. So they are the ocean people that they're taking care of the oceanfront waters still to this day. Reuben George, his children, there's so many advocates and activists that are working to protect the waters, the ocean waters. That is their birthright. We are on their ancestral land. Kakite, can you say Kakite? So Kakite is New Westminster. There's hardly anybody left in that band. Very, very few people. Chief Rhonda talks about it being the resting place on the riverbank. So if you think of New Westminster beside the Fraser River, Simon Fraser also was not a good dude. He nearly eliminated so many of the nations around here. New Westminster, Kwantlen, Brandon Gabriel, who was here doing artwork. I'm not sure if he did one of these pieces of artwork here. I know local nations did the work here. I know he did a canoe here recently, last year. He spoke about how I think his child born was like number 103 or something in their nation. So imagine how many thousands of people they had before, and now his child just recently born is like number 103 in the early 100s. So that nation was nearly annihilated and wiped out. So Kakite is similar. They don't have that many people left right now. But if you think of their name meaning the resting place on the riverbank, you can see how that river, which is shared territory, would be a place where you could see what was happening on their territory. The next one, Musqueam. Can you say Musqueam? Musqueam. So Musqueam is a tall river grass with a little bit of flower on it. And they would say that when the river grass was plentiful, their people were plentiful. There was lots of people. But when their river grass shrunk, it was also indicative of their population and numbers shrinking due to smallpox and other colonization measures. So they would measure their wealth according to the river grass. Squamish. Sometimes they say Squamish, and you see that number 7 when you're driving up to Upper Squamish or Whistler. And so that number 7 is like a guttural stop. It's a guttural language coming from deep within them. And Chief Ian Campbell says that their language mimics the shape of the land. So if you think of like the tall mountains and the valleys and the glaciers, all of that, that's how their language is mimicking after that. So if you say Squamish, right, it's going up and down inside your body. So their language is living in their body when they speak it, and they breathe life into their words and their language. So it's very deeply rooted and connected to the land. It means a strong wind, Squamish, that go through all of those territories, the mountains and the valleys. And then Stalo is a political amalgamation of 11 Stalo communities from Yale to Langley. So Stalo doesn't cover this exact territory, but there's a lot of Stalo people on this territory. And Stalo means the river people. So they use the rivers as their highways. And they would go up and down between communities. And their dialects, they have Halkomelem, and they would have upriver and downriver. And when you spoke, you would know if you were from upriver or downriver by your accent of your dialect and the way that you said certain words. So that's what Stalo means. Guess how I learned all this information? Google. Exactly. So you all have access to learning this information as well, Google. I mean, I've been to many ceremonies. I've been living on this territory for 25 years. I've been to many ceremonies, and I find that that's a privilege. And that's why I have the knowledge to be able to speak with you today. because of being an educator in these topics, both in my union and also in the school districts that I work in, and anywhere else I'm invited. I love truth telling. So I have an action for you, and a request and a challenge to visit each nation's website. Click about and learn something more about the nation whose territory you reside on or whose territory you're curious about, and share that information as widely as possible. One last thing about acknowledgements. I encourage you to begin saying territorial acknowledgements instead of land acknowledgements for this reason. You are acknowledging the original people and their relationship to their territories, not just the land. Land in Western worldview is seen as a commodity, a resource, with property lines, municipalities, provinces, and borders. Territory, according to First Peoples, is the land, the water, the animals, the plants as food, the plants as medicine, the trails, and the trade routes, sharing overlapping fishing spots or hunting grounds. This is what we are acknowledging and learning about. The Indigenous people, the original people, and their relationship to their territory, not just to the land as a resource or a commodity to be divided and bordered. So when I hear land acknowledgements, I encourage people to start saying territorial acknowledgements and explaining why. So please say territorial acknowledgements and move beyond just acknowledging the land as a performative checkbox that we are recognizing were the people who used to live here before us. Before I go on to number 2, which is going to be the history of TRC Day, I promised that I would talk about the ribbon skirt and the hat that I'm wearing also as acknowledgement. So ribbon skirts are, in my opinion, anybody can wear a ribbon skirt. So if you want to make a ribbon skirt and wear it to ceremony, it is a symbol of solidarity. It's a symbol. Skirts in Indigenous women's teachings are to cover our most sacred area where we have life-giving privileges and responsibilities. So when we wear skirts, we are protecting and acknowledging our life-giving privileges and responsibilities as being mothers, being grandmothers, being life-giving providers. So in my teachings I've received from the Anishinaabe people, they would tell me that we have the Creator, God the Creator, and right next is females, because females have the ability to carry lives in our body. And that's a huge responsibility. It's a sacred responsibility. And for that reason, we were put right next to the Creator, because we are also creating life in our body. But mainstream society doesn't often think of us that way. And so I try to reclaim those teachings with our young women and our young girls so that they know that that life-giving aspect of us being life carriers is a sacred responsibility. And I give them coming-of-age teachings regarding that. That's why we wear skirts. And ribbon skirts celebrate that. The hat, I'm not Coast Salish. I made this hat as a school district prodee many years ago, and I don't wear it too often because I was feeling it's not my culture. I'm Cree, Métis from the plains. Maybe I should be wearing some kind of headband, I don't know. But I was given permission to make the hat and wear the hat and honor the people of this territory and give teachings about the cedar tree, which I shared earlier when I talked about Queequetlam being where they made the nets up the narrow part of the river. The cedar tree is the tree of life here on this territory, and it gives almost everything that you can imagine except for being able to eat it. It would give the house posts, so that would allow them to build their homes. It would give the trees to make the masks, which would give them the ability to have their ceremonies. It would give them the ability to make like wooden spoons and bowls so they could eat. This could be made into mats for them to sleep on. They would use the cedar to bend the boxes and make memorial boxes, which we now call coffins. It gave so many options for for sustenance. So that's why they called it the Cedar Tree of Life. So I honor the hat and the skirt that I'm wearing for those teachings. So I'll move on to the history of Truth and Reconciliation Day, where we are now and where we must go. So let's start with where it really all began, Orange Shirt Day. In 1973, Phyllis Webstad was taken to St. Joseph's Residential School near Williams Lake. On her first day, her new orange shirt, a gift from her grandmother, was forcibly taken away, symbolizing the loss of culture and freedom that she would further experience. Years later, Phyllis shared her story, inspiring Orange Shirt Day, which has been around since 2013. The movement gained traction, and every year on September 30th, people across Canada wear orange shirts to honor the survivors of residential schools and promote awareness of their tragic legacy. In 2021, a pivotal moment came when the Canadian government officially designated September 30th as National Truth and Reconciliation Day. Oh, I wanted to mention about Phyllis. She's actually getting an honorary doctorate from Simon Fraser University, SFU, on Wednesday. And I also wanted to mention that how, as Indigenous people, we are required, and it lifts us up to participate in Western education systems to get these letters behind our names to be taken more seriously and more credibly. And we're working hard with the unions actually in these secondary, post-secondary institutes to recognize traditional knowledge as equal and as valuable, which is what they're doing with Phyllis by giving her a doctorate for all the work that she's done. So that is an act of reconciliation right there. So in 2021, the government, the Canadian federal government, officially designated September 30th as the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. This significant step was not just the results of years of grassroots advocacy centered around Orange Shirt Day, but also came in the wake of the grim discovery that shocked the nation. Earlier that year, ground-penetrating radar technology had revealed the presence of 215 unmarked grave sites at the Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia. This devastating find brought renewed urgency and public attention to the dark history and ongoing impacts of the residential school system on Indigenous communities. The combination of grassroots activism and this unsettling revelation compelled the government to take action, further legitimizing the calls for action, recognition, and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. And as a result, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation serves not just as an extension of Orange Shirt Day's original intent to honor the survivors and the victims, but also as a broader platform for Canadians to engage in meaningful dialogue and actions aimed at addressing the historical and ongoing injustices faced by Indigenous communities. I also wanted to mention that I do a lot of public speaking about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit and non-binary people. And I gained those skills by my activism in the union. I am with CUPE, Canadian Union of Public Employees, and I was able to be a representative representing Indigenous workers, as well as with the BC Federation of Labour, doing the same work for 4 years. So altogether, 6 years of union activism. And I spoke a lot about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And people listened, but there was no action. And the time that I saw action happening was when the 215 were announced. And all of those 215 and all the further Indigenous spirits that we are honoring and talking about these days, those are the real truth tellers. Because it took them to wake up our country to truth and reconciliation, to create this day. I was talking and talking till I was blue in the face about the MMIW2S plus, but it took the 215 to start this, to go to the next level. So I really acknowledge and honor the 215, and maybe this is a good time to take a moment of silence, to acknowledge all of the spirits found and unfound still in the over 130 residential schools and Indian hospitals that we have not yet talked about. So we'll just take a moment of silence. Thank you so much. So where we are now, Stalo Territory just released information. 158 children who died at or because of their attendance at 3 former residential school sites and 1 former Indian hospital. St. Mary's Residential School, Coqualitza Industrial Residential School in Chilliwack, and All Hallows School in Yale, Coqualitza Indian Hospital. The elder, Cyril Pierre, who's a member of Katy First Nation and a survivor of St. Mary's Indian Residential School, said this in a statement. This isn't a victory, this isn't a win, this is justice. This is validation of what me and my people have gone through in residential schools driven by the government with the backbone of the church. Squamish Nation is still in the process of preparing to search the St. Paul's Indian Residential School, so those findings are still yet to come. At this point, over 10,000 children whose potential graves have been located. There are over 130 residential schools to search. We will be hearing this news for the rest of our lives. Other elements of reconciliation to consider are only 13 of the 94 calls to action have been completed. There are still boil water advisories on reserves in Canada. Semiahmoo First Nation just got clean water not too long ago in the last couple years. The opioid crisis affects all families, not just Indigenous families, but a high number are Indigenous families. An elder and knowledge keeper from Stalo Nation. We had a tour in the Pro-D of going to St. Mary's Residential School, and he was crying during the tour. He said he usually doesn't cry because he gives this information so often, but he was crying because his friend had passed away from an overdose of the opioids. And he said he was really saddened because on the death certificate, it's going to say overdose. But the real reason for his death is residential school. And we need to start facing that truth. And the healthcare system needs to advocate for that truth in that kind of realm of thinking. Like what happened to that person, why they are turning to opioids. The criminal justice system and the child welfare system need to be examined for the continued systemic racism in those systems. Finally, number 3, your personal commitment to reconciliation and taking it forward organizationally, politically, and having workplace conversations and hopefully action. We can't do this work alone as Indigenous people. We are getting tired. We need allies. So, what you can do about all of this. Ask your workplace if there's a reconciliation strategic plan. If not, ask why not. Create reconciliation committees at work, at church, at any organization that has groups of people. Have uncomfortable conversations and bring awareness. Show up to support Indigenous allies at marches, rallies, protests that you have researched and you agree with. Talk to your children and grandchildren about these truths. They are learning it in school. Read Indigenous authors, watch movies, listen to Indigenous musicians. Diversify your news sources. Please watch APTN, the Aboriginal People's Television Network. 8 o'clock every night is the news. APTN. Whether you have cable or not, APTN is available to everybody. It's also online. The last thing I'm going to do is to say Google. You can do it on your phone right now if you like. Hashtag Next 150. The movie was actually on TV last night. I watched the last half of it. And it's called Indian Horse. And it's a story about residential school survivors and their a young fella's the way that he used hockey to survive his abuse. And what happened with him in his lifetime regarding his abuse and how his life unfolded because of that, which happens to a lot of survivors. Hashtag Next 150 is based on that movie. It came out when Canada turned 150 years old. There are 21 challenges, and they're not all dark and grim. There are some fun challenges that you can do with your family. Learn how to make bannock. Make an Indigenous music list. Listen to survivor stories. Learn about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Learn about the 94 calls to action. There's things about LGBTQ2+. There's things about decolonizing your garden if you are a person that likes to work with their hands and the earth. There's so many interesting things. There's something for everybody. So hashtag next 150 means, what are we going to do for the next 150 years towards truth and reconciliation? You know, Canada's known as the nice country. When I was growing up and backpacking through Europe, the nice country. Make sure you put a Canadian flag on your backpack so they don't think you're American, I was told. Right? How many of us heard that? And now look at what's unfolded. Canada is not such a nice country, but we are nice people. We are good people, and we are living on this land together. So we need to learn how to live together, and part of it is learning the truth. You know, I just took a sustainability course in university, and that was really hard to learn the truth of what's happening to our land and to our water and to our air and carbon emissions. It was so difficult. And what it reminded me of, when I was learning about it, it was so dark. There was an article called the Unraveling the Truth or something like that. And it was so hard to read. It was so dark. And it made me think of how dark it is to learn, how allies and non-Indigenous people must feel about learning about truth and reconciliation. It made me think, now I'm put in that same position of learning about the truth of the earth and sustainability practices and what's happening. So we're all doing it in some way or another, and sustainability is part of truth and reconciliation as well, to take better care of our earth. So the last two things that I want to share is that locally, Port Moody Arts will be leading a collaborative art project, Healing Hand. Participants will add their handprints to a big wooden art piece, building layers of generational trauma and healing together into one hand of healing. And this piece will be permanently displayed here at the Noons Creek hatchery. And the other thing is, members of Port Moody Youth Focus Council have prepared an information board with a question to community on what Orange Shirt Day means to them. And the public will have the opportunity to write a message on an orange shirt, t-shirt cutout, which will be displayed on the board. The board will be brought back to the Port Moody Recreation Complex and on display in the lobby for the following week. I think they should leave it up there always, personally. Maybe somebody can work on that. Lastly, this is my personal challenge to you. My braids. I don't usually wear braids. I have a cousin who grew up with her teachings, and I met her in the labor movement when I sat on a National Indigenous Council, and I said my family name is Calahoo, and she said, I come from that line too, we're cousins, and now we become friends and cousins and like sisters. And she wears braids all the time. She's a flight attendant, and when she started wearing braids, they told her that her braids were not attractive and that they didn't follow their dress code, their grooming procedures. Then, when she wanted to get her facial markings on her chin, she asked and asked and asked. This was an 18-year fight for her to get her facial markings that came to her in a dream. So they told her if she got her facial markings, that they would demote her to a call center where she was not in a public-facing position. She fought. She started to fight a human rights complaint. They heeded it. They checked into it. She has her facial markings. She's still a flight attendant, but she's fighting all the time just to be who she is and reclaim her identity. And that happens with a lot of us. So she says she wears her braids for those whose braids were taken. So to honor those whose braids were taken, I would like to start a movement right here, right now in Port Moody, for everyone that has long hair to wear braids on this day. And to put it, to make a picture on social media and hashtag rock your braids. Rock your braids. And let's make a new movement. Rock your braids on behalf of those whose braids were taken. Miigwech, thank you so much for listening. If you want to find me, I'm on Facebook. Shelly Bear, Shelly with an EY, Bear Senior, which stands for my last name, Sage Ricky. But Shelly Bear Senior on Facebook is the easiest place to find me. We have one more guest speaker. honored guest speaker from the two more guest speakers, and I'm not privy to the information. I know this is Ed Hall, but I'll let them introduce themselves and get off the stage.
Thank you very much for that, Shelley. Yeah, I'm the more supposed recent, not re-elected chief of the Coquitlam First Nation. I'll give you a little bit of an ancient dialect flair that I'll add to my couple of minutes here that I'm going to share with you, and a little bit of information I can pass along too. Ike Swale, Hale Med Hall, Tanasqueef, Talisanak, Coquitlam, Tumma, Ossiem Tasiest, Eaton Alton, E. Machkantan, Misa, Coquitlam, Eaton. Coquitlam, Slave-a-Tuit, Musqueam, BKC, everybody, all of us, and much shared First Nations traditional territories here. Good day, how are you all? Ed Hall is my English given name. Swampalem is my ancestral name. I just wanted to come and share a little bit of the dialect with you. I'm actually doing a tour right now from Maple Ridge out to North Van, so my next stop is going to be Surrey and then New Westminster and then North Van, so I am just giving you a quick introduction, a taste of the ancient language that was originally spoken here, and that for those who are unaware of the language, it's called Hunkaminam. It's the second of three dialects of the Halkomelem language. Starts from Yale and goes all the way over to Cowichan, and right now we're in the lower river area and the inlet. I'll leave you with those thoughts, and I want to say thank you very much. You've been a very good audience. Hands up to you for all of you sticking around there and lasting a little bit longer here. And I think you're probably going to have a little bit more, but I'm going to be going because I'm doing a tour across the the Great Divides here. Okay, thank you.
Hi everyone, I've been asked to sing and lead the honor song from I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it like this, Secwepemc Nation, where the first children were found 3 years ago now, I believe. This is my third year with the honor to come and lead the song with you. Some of you may have been here before and sung it. And for me, it's a very sacred honor to sing to those dead children and also to the children who lived, whose hearts had to see their friends disappear. My relations, thank you. Way high, hey yo, way high.
Yay.